time travel, a concept that has astounded the human mind. While the world is divided into two camps, with one saying it's just stuff of science fiction, we have the other side saying that it's just a matter of numbers. Even if you are a firm believer that the movie Back to the Future is a bunch of bull, you might want to stick around for today's video, because we're going to take a look at perhaps the most convincing piece of evidence that time travel is already happening. Today, we are looking at the strange encounter of Sergei Ponomarenko. On April 23, 2006, in the city of Kiev, police received a strange call regarding a strange man. The man in question looked just like any other crazy person that will trigger a call for concern. He was confused, scared, and dressed as if he came from a 60s theme party. Except maybe he wasn't crazy. Well, you see, the man himself identified as Sergei Ponomarenko, and he insisted he was from 1958. Obviously, the police at the scene asked him for some identification, which he readily provided. But upon checking the documentation, they were surprised to find that it was issued from a place that didn't exist anymore, the Soviet Union. Well, it was possible that people in Kiev still carried identification issued from the Soviet Union. But seeing as the Soviets dissolved more than a couple of decades ago, you'd have to be in your later years to carry this ID. And that was just it. Even though his birth date on the ID was in 1932, Sergei looked like he was in his late 20s. Visibly confused and irritated, the police handcuffs Sergei and tells him that a nice doctor wants to speak to him. Next thing you know, Sergei is taken to a mental hospital, where he gets interviewed by a Dr. Pablo Kudrikov, who plays along and asks him, if you're from the 1950s, how did you end up here? To which he replies, it was daytime, and I wanted to go for a walk in the city. I took my camera, but when I left my house, I saw a strange object that had a bell shape, and it was flying in a strange way. It is difficult for me to explain what I was seeing. It might be better to look at the photos from my camera. Dr. Kudrikov, still skeptical, decided to continue playing along and got hold of the camera, and this was when everything changed. A photography fanatic himself, Dr. Kudrikov immediately recognized the camera as an old Yashica. Taking it down to get the film developed, he was soon told that the type of film hadn't been manufactured since the 1970s, and the manufacture date on that particular reel read 1956. But what was strange was that the reel was in perfect condition, as if it was bought yesterday. However, things soon took a turn for the weirder as soon as the photos were developed. You see, the photos that were found on the camera showed Kiev, except it was like looking into the past. Everything was from the 50s, from the buildings and signs to the clothes and even the vehicles. But going through the photos, Dr. Kudrikov soon noticed that not only did the photos show old buildings, but there was a couple featured in the photo standing in front of the buildings that didn't exist anymore. And the man in the photo looked exactly like Sergei. And it did not stop there, as in the last photo of the reel, there was a bell-shaped UFO. Getting a little agitated, Sergei subsequently turned to the doctor and said, "Are you convinced I'm telling the truth now?" But not before explaining that he doesn't know what happened. One moment he was taking a picture, the next moment a UFO appeared in the frame, and just as he went down to figure out if there was something wrong with the camera, he looked up and a bright flash of light brought him to 2006. With many thoughts and questions unanswered, the only hypothesis Dr. Kudakov came to was that Sergei could have been involved in an alien abduction, where the craft that took him flew across the universe at the speed of light. And according to Einstein's theory of relativity, this process would mean that Sergei would have experienced time dilation, where time would have barely passed for him while he was on the journey, but back on Earth, 47 years would have flown by. That night, security footage captured Sergei walking back to his ward in the hospital, but after he closed the door, he was never seen again. Even though there were bars on the windows in the ward and only one way in or out, the security footage never caught anyone else going in or coming out. Well, at this point you might be thinking this is all a hoax, and that's all to the story. But you see, even though Sergei vanished, he left behind one key piece of evidence to this mystery: his camera and photos, and more importantly, his name. The police wanted to see if there was any credibility to the statements, but they were stunned as when they dug back, historical records showed that there was actually a Sergei Ponomarenko that was declared missing in Kiev in the 1960s. But that was not the only interesting thing. Remember the woman in the photograph that Sergei claimed to be his girlfriend 70 years ago? Well, they found her too. Sergei's girlfriend, who was now much older at this point, told the police that Sergei had actually disappeared that same day in 1958, but returned just a few days later, the same amount of time he was present in 2006. Furthermore, the lady clarified that after coming back, Sergei then disappeared again in the 1970s, but this time he was never seen again. However, if you thought that was the end, the visit to the lady just added more questions to the police investigations, as the ladies started taking out an old postcard which was dated 2050, with Kiev in the background, except this time it was full of skyscrapers and an older-looking Sergei with a mustache with a note saying that he will be back soon. Well, something must have gone wrong, because till this day, Sergei has not returned. But the story of Sergei Ponomarenko has probably become one of the most well-documented cases of time travel in history. But the question is, did it actually happen? Well, in the science fiction world, time travel has been a staple concept for a long time. Books like the memoirs of the 20th century, dating back as early as the 1730s, to modern-day movies such as Interstellar, all explore time travel in their own right. But what made it really go from just a fiction to a theory was when Einstein published his special theory of relativity, describing how the faster one moves through space, the slower time moves, essentially saying that if you travel at the speed of light in a spaceship 100 light years away and return back to Earth, you would have been going so fast that years on Earth would have gone by, but to you, it would only be a matter of minutes. Furthermore, the theory goes on to say that space-time is really just like a piece of fabric that curves around whatever is matter present, like the Earth, thus saying in simple terms that the bigger the mass of an object will result in slower time movement, resulting in the term space-time dilation. Well, if this explanation is still complex for you, remember the scene in Interstellar where the lead actors were on Miller's planet, and upon returning, only minutes had passed for them, but for the people on Earth, it was years. Traveling into the future seems pretty straightforward, but according to the story, our main character traveled back into the past. So is that even possible? time travel to the past is a little bit more controversial. To put it simply, a scientist by the name of Germain Tobar actually proved that time is essentially a loop and not a straight line as what we all think. And when you combine that with Einstein's theory of relativity, it is possible. Well, that is, if you have something that could warp space-time so much that you essentially have a shortcut from point A to point B, ripping a hole through the space-time continuum, allowing you to pass all future events on the time loop and go back into the past. But the problem is, in order to do that, you have to be traveling faster than light. And something like that would require a huge amount of energy, way more than what technology of our time can give us today. To put it bluntly, you will require the power of a dying star. Could this perhaps be what happened to Sergei? Well, skeptics believe that it is possible that an advanced civilization that had that type of technology might have abducted Sergei and somehow had the power to transport him through a wormhole. But may I propose another, simpler theory? That the story of Sergei Ponomarenko did not happen at all. Even though we have established that time travel is theoretically possible, and that this story might be true, there isn't a single shred of evidence that comes directly from the sources themselves. Rather, all of it is a form of retelling from someone's point of view. There was no article in the newspaper or official police report that we could find, and all the photos or videos with regards to this case all seem to originate from one full-length documentary with 10 episodes called Aliens, a show that aired on a Ukraine television channel called 1+1, with the episode that tells this story called Time Travel. Immediately, when watching this documentary, it starts off with a disclaimer at the beginning of the show, saying that the Aliens series aims to restore scenes of controversial topics. Furthermore, in the show, it says Sergei appeared on Tuesday, April 23, 2006. But if we look back at the calendar, April 3, 2006 was actually on a Sunday. Looking at the documentary, during his first visit there is a scene of Sergei telling the doctor that he was born in June 1932. However, his ID shows that he was born in March. Especially for a show that involves time travel, don't you think that is a little strange that the dates and time don't add up? But that is not all. If you compare the photo that Sergei sends to his girlfriend from the future and the photo that the police have on file from the missing persons report, notice any similarities? Well, the clothes are exactly the same, except Sergei looks digitally aged, with a mustache and a skyline in the background that seems to be New York City photoshopped into the back of Kiev, as you can see from the building that looks like the Empire State Building. Well, the evidence is pretty conclusive, and it really just seems like this was all just made up for a television show, with casting directors and actors. And even though there is no conclusive evidence to show that this might originate from an actual story, let's not forget that theoretically, time travel is possible. In a world where time is the only resource that is limited by physics and cannot be renewed or re-earned, that's probably the reason why many of us fantasize about being able to take time into our own hands with a time machine. But for now, we'll put this story to bed and dream of the day when time travel is actually made possible. Or is it already possible?